Now, you would think that any program out there that seeks to de-radicalize potential terrorists would be high up on Donald Trump's list of priorities. I mean, it's high up on my list of priorities. You would think that stopping terror groups or possible lone wolf attacks in the future from attacking Americans would be something that Trump would be very interested in. Again, I think a lot of people would be very interested in these types of programs to de-radicalize people. And of course, this is something, stopping terror attacks, keeping Americans safe. That's something that Donald Trump ran on. So you would think that he takes it very, very seriously. So with that in mind, it seems very curious that just weeks before what happened in Charlottesville, the Trump administration revoked a grant to something called Life After Hate. Now, Life After Hate just happens to be a group that de-radicalizes neo-Nazis. Oh, see, I get it now. See, when he said he was going to protect us against terrorists, he actually meant Muslims. But when it comes to right-wing extremism, well, Trump, he doesn't give two shits. Because, you know why? Because he thinks a lot of white supremacists happen to be his base. Now, here are the details, and look, I'm gonna warn you, you're gonna find this probably very troubling if you've been paying attention. Now, recently, the Department of Homeland Security had awarded the group Life After Hate about $400,000 in federal funding as part of its Countering Violent Extremism program. Now, that happened in January, just days before former President Barack Obama had left office. Now, it was the only group selected for a grant that focused exclusively on fighting against white supremacy. So, and look, and that's a good thing. See, we already have a lot of programs out there aimed at fighting radical Islamic extremism, right? And that's fine. I don't like Islamic extremism. I'm sure you don't like Islamic extremism. And yes, we should fight against that. And more importantly, I think we should focus on trying to de-radicalize these people and prevent them from becoming terrorists in the first place. That'd be smart, right? But I also think that we should do the same thing when it comes to white supremacy. We should be fighting both because both are bad. Now, what's interesting here is the group, it was earmarked $400,000 in January, but it was never given that money. In fact, by the time the Trump administration took over, they immediately blocked it. Huh. Now, this is according to Huffington Post. Trump aides, including Katherine Gorka, a controversial national security analyst known for her anti-Muslim rhetoric, were already working towards eliminating Life After Hate's grant and to direct all funding towards fighting what the president has described as radical Islamic terrorism. So that's immediately who blocked that. Now, Katherine Gorka, that name should seem familiar. Oh, right. That is the wife of Sebastian Gorka. Now, in December, Gorka, then a member of Trump's transition team, met with George S.U.P.R.E.M.A.C.Y, a DHS official who headed the Countering Violent Extremism program until he resigned last month, and his then deputy, David Gersten. Gorka told S.U.P.R.E.M.A.C.Y and Gersten that she didn't agree with the Obama administration's approach to countering violent extremism, particularly the way the administration had described the threat of extremism. According to Nate Snyder, an Obama administration DHS counterterrorism official who was an advisor on countering violent extremism efforts and was given a readout in the meeting, yeah, Gorka had said, hey, man, I don't agree with what you're doing. I don't agree with how you're doing it. I definitely don't agree with your messaging. You're not focusing on Muslim extremists enough. Well, but wait a minute. We actually are. And if you remember, there was a I don't know if task force is the right way to put it, but there was a part of the government that was looking into right-wing, that's a good Freudian slip there, right-wing extremism, and the right-wingers, they got pissed off. How dare you look into right-wing extremism? We got to look into Muslim extremism, Islamic extremism. And President Obama was like, okay, yeah, let's reduce our staff. So you have like one person looking at domestic right-wing terrorism, whereas you have all these departments that are looking at Islamic extremism. Now, all things should be equal, right? But no, apparently they're not. The Trump administration had repeatedly criticized the previous administration for avoiding terms like radical Islam, out of the concern that it could alienate Muslims across in the U.S. and abroad. Snyder said at the December meeting that was a sort of foreshadowing what was to come. So basically he's saying, I knew that they were going to go and eliminate these grants, eliminate these programs, so that we could put all that money into hating Muslims. Huh. Who would have thought? But look, I'm always amused when it comes to the say your name people, right? Oh, you got to call it Islamic terrorism. Radical Islamic terrorism. Okay. What? Like what? You think that if we say that it's going to magically go away? No. Terrorism is terrorism. But look, the whole point here of calling it radical Islamic terrorism is basically to say that terrorism is strictly within the domain of Islam, which isn't true. Okay, terrorism can actually be used by any group. Terrorism is terrorism, whether it be the Catholic versus Protestant terrorism in Ireland, back when they had an issue with that. Those weren't Muslims. Those were Christians. You also have the different right-wing domestic terrorist groups. Look, the point is terrorism isn't a Muslim invention. It's existed for ages and been used by many different groups. So to really paint it only as a Muslim invention is ridiculous and not factual. That's not to say that there isn't a problem with Muslim extremism. Absolutely we have a problem with that, and we need to do something about that. And we do have a lot of these groups that are fighting it. But we also need to look at other terrorism, and we also need to change our discourse to reflect the fact that other groups also do terrorism, and it's not specifically the domain of Muslims or Muslim extremists. So that's my problem with the whole discussion over this. But look, once you understand that terrorism is terrorism, once you're like, okay, well, look, that makes sense. Well, and you look at what they're doing, you start to understand what their goal is here. Gorka and her husband, Sebastian Gorka, also a White House official, have collaborated on numerous writings about the threat of radical Islam. Not saying that there's not a threat when it comes to radical extremism. All fundamentalism is threatening to Western values, whether it be Christian fundamentalism, Jewish fundamentalism, which it's ridiculous, but not necessarily. I guess you don't see Jewish fundamentalists going and bombing people, but nonetheless, you have the fundamentalism of any stripe is against freedom, okay, and doesn't fit in with our values. That's why most people, when you see a fundamentalist, you don't agree with them, okay, and they seem strange and different and wrong, but it's because they are. Again, fundamentalists of any stripe can be dangerous. Okay. But anyway, since 2001, right? And I'm getting in here into the how dangerous right-wing terrorism, right-wing extremism is versus terrorist Islamic terrorism, okay? Now, since 2001, the number of violent attacks on U.S. soil inspired by far-right ideology has actually spiked to an average of more than 300 a year, according to a study by the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point. And in a 2015 survey of U.S. law enforcement groups found that they consider anti-government violent extremists to be a more severe threat than radicalized Muslims in America. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't a threat out there when it comes to Europe. Now, in Europe, the dynamics are completely different, and there are a lot more deaths from radical Islamic terrorism. And look, you know, there are numbers to corroborate that fact. But in America, you're far more likely to be killed by a right-wing anti-government terrorist than you are a Muslim terrorist. And that's the truth of here in America. Now, but here we are in America, eliminating the watchdogs out there that are combating that extremism. And of course, unfortunately, that was planned. The day after Trump won the election, Sebastian Gorka had said, "I predict with absolute certitude the jettisoning of concepts such as the CVE. And once Trump entered the White House in January, the office of then DHS Secretary John Kelly had ordered a review of the Countering Violent Extremism program. Kelly's office wanted to revet the groups receiving a portion of the $10 million Congress had appropriated for the program, even though the DHS had already publicly announced the recipients of said grants. And while that review was underway, DHS and FBI warned in an internal intelligence bulletin of the threat posed by white supremacy. White supremacists were responsible for 49 homicides in 26 attacks from 2000 to 2016, more than any other domestic extremist movement. And they also concluded that members of the white supremacist movement will likely continue to pose a threat of lethal violence over the next year. But again, they ignore that. Why? Well, aside from it being their base, it's also because Trump has surrounded himself with people that happen to be tied to white supremacist, anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, and anti-immigrant groups. And wait till you get a load of what some of them believe. Now, Katherine Gorka, as I mentioned, now an advisor in the Department of Homeland Security's Policy Office, has pushed conspiracy theories about infiltration of the Muslim Brotherhood into the government and the media. Really? Muslim Brotherhood and the government? They're doing a really bad job, because you know that we have launched so many missiles, dropped so many bombs on Syria that we ran out of bombs. Bombing Muslims. We're bombing Muslims in Yemen. We're bombing Muslims in a lot of different countries, some of which I don't even know. And yet, somehow, that's the work of the Muslim Brotherhood being inside the government. Wow, good job. It's ridiculous. And there's no proof. It sounds like something that kooky Michelle Bachmann came up with. But there's more. There's also an insane memo pushed by the recently fired Rich Higgins. Now, Higgins was appointed by Michael Flynn and was recently fired for spreading these crazy conspiracy theories. Now, Flynn was in the strategic planning office at the NSC, and he wrote that there was an array of forces working together to try to take down Trump. That group includes globalists, which is another name for Jews, Marxists, bankers, the media, the deep state, Islamists, and even members of the Republican establishment. Really? You think Jews and Islamists are working together to try to take down Donald Trump? Really? Really? Come on, man. You believe that? That the Marxists and the Muslims are working together with Republicans to take out Donald Trump? You guys believe that? You believe that? That's insane. That's the kind of crazy conspiracy theories that people are believing in. So, of course, what they're going to do is that they're going to ignore the threats, the actual threats from white supremacy, and actually defund efforts to try to de-radicalize people from doing terrorist attacks. And unfortunately, those attacks from right-wing groups are the #1 domestic threat inside of the United States. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.